The night after my wife's funeral, I overheard my son and his wife arguing about who would control my $28 million fortune. They didn't shed a tear, only fought over money. Later, I discovered a hidden wooden chest my wife had sealed years ago. Inside was not love, but truth, and that truth had the power to destroy them, leaving nothing standing. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I remember the sacrifices most people never saw. I worked my hands raw for decades, pouring concrete in the cold, hammering nails until my knuckles bled, all to give my family a life better than mine. I paid David's tuition in full, $120,000, just so he could walk across that college stage without debt holding him down. I bought him his first car, $25,000 in cash, because I wanted him to be safe on the road. I helped with his wedding, wrote a check for $15,000 to cover flowers, catering, and the band, even when my own bank account was stretched thin. And yet, when I lay in a hospital bed, tubes in my arm, staring at the sterile ceiling, my phone never rang. Not one call, not one visit. My sacrifices had turned into shadows, forgotten the moment they were no longer convenient. The hurt wasn't just about money. It was about the silence, about the cold absence of a simple, "How are you, Dad?" And beyond the numbers, there were sacrifices money could never measure. I remember nights eating beans on rice, turning down steak dinners with old friends because every extra dollar had to go into David's future. I passed on a trip to Alaska, something I dreamed of since I was a boy, just so I could cover his last semester's books. I canceled anniversaries with my wife because David needed us to co-sign another loan. Each no I said to myself was a yes for him, and I thought that was what love was supposed to look like. But now, looking back, I see how much of myself I carved away until there was barely anything left. It wasn't just my money. It was my time, my health, my dreams. And in the end, all that sacrifice felt invisible, as if I had built a house of cards waiting for the first gust of betrayal to bring it down. This house in Asheville, the one sitting on the ridge with a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, is more than wood and stone to me. I laid the first brick, cut the first beam, and ran the wiring with my own hands. Every corner holds a memory. The living room where we spent Christmas mornings, my wife in her red sweater and David tearing into gifts. The kitchen where she baked pecan pie every Thanksgiving, her laughter echoing louder than the oven timer. The porch where we sat in rocking chairs, watching the sun dip below the horizon. This place was never just a house. It was the heart of our family. And now it's the very thing they want to strip from me. To them, it's just equity, $600,000 in their pockets. To me, it's every sleepless night, every holiday meal, every kiss goodnight from the woman I buried. I can't walk through these rooms without feeling both warmth and a blade in my chest. What was once comfort now feels like evidence in a crime scene. My own family trying to erase me from the very space I built for them. While sorting through her things, I stumbled across something I wasn't meant to find. In the back of her closet, tucked inside an old wooden box, was a sealed envelope and a stack of papers tied with a faded ribbon. My wife had left something hidden. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was her handwriting, shaky but deliberate, and attached were documents from the bank. My heart stopped as I read. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, had forged signatures, falsified loan applications, and buried David in debts he never told me about. A secret agreement showed they had been using my name, my good credit, as leverage for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It wasn't just greed. It was fraud, deceit, and betrayal woven deep into the fabric of my family. I sank into the chair, the paper crumpling in my hand. My wife had known. She had discovered this truth, but instead of shattering us while she lived, she had hidden it away, maybe hoping I'd find it when I needed it most. And now I understood why she'd left me this box. It wasn't love she passed on. It was true, a truth heavy enough to crush everything my son and his wife had built. The pain twisted into something sharper. For months I thought they simply didn't care, that their betrayal was neglect, selfishness, maybe even cold indifference. But now I saw it clearly. They had been waiting, circling like vultures, biding their time for the right moment to swoop in and claim what wasn't theirs. "So this is what it's been about all along," I whispered to her photo on the mantel. "Not love, not family, just money." I felt anger rise where sorrow had lived. I wasn't weak anymore. The very thing meant to destroy me had become my weapon. They thought I was an old man too blind to see, too broken to fight. But my wife had armed me even from the grave. And I promised her right then I would not let her silence be in vain. I would not let their lies stand. That night I scrolled through old text messages from David. Most were unanswered pleas from me. "Son, let's have dinner." "Son, I miss you." "Son, call me when you can." Dozens of little olive branches were left to wither. My thumb hovered over one, and then I deleted it. One by one, I erased them all. For the first time, I didn't beg for his attention. For the first time, I chose my peace over his indifference. The act felt small, but it was more powerful than any check I'd ever written. I was cutting the cord. I was no longer a wallet with a heartbeat. I was a man who had finally remembered his own worth. Now I sit in this quiet living room, the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. The same clock that once soothed me now feels like it's counting down to war. The walls, once warm with laughter, echo with betrayal. The wedding photo of me and my wife looks down, her smile frozen, as if asking me what I plan to do. The rocking chair creaks under my weight, not with comfort, but with loneliness. Yet beneath the silence, there's something else. A storm is building. I can feel it in my chest. The stillness before thunder. The breath before a fight. They think I'm beaten, but they're wrong. I'm not done. Not by a long shot. And so I close the box, place the envelope back inside, and slide it beneath the table. Tomorrow I will make calls. Tomorrow I will take steps they never expected. For now I whisper into the quiet air, to the woman whose love still lingers here. I was blind, but not anymore. You gave me the truth. And I'll use it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. I woke up the next morning with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The pain of what I'd uncovered the night before still sat heavy in my chest, but now it was joined by something else. Determination. For too long I had let grief, guilt, and fear rule me. For too long I had mistaken silence for peace, when really it was surrender. But not anymore. My wife's letter had changed everything. She hadn't left me with love alone. She had left me with the truth, and truth was heavier than gold. Truth was my weapon. I dressed slowly, pulling on a clean shirt and jacket. My hands, the same ones that had trembled holding her envelope, no longer shook. They felt steady, even strong. The house around me was quiet, too quiet, as though it was waiting to see what I would do. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, lighting up the framed pictures on the wall, smiling faces from long ago, family dinners, Christmas mornings, a life that seemed so far away now. I paused at one photograph of David as a boy, holding the bicycle I'd saved 3 months of overtime to buy him. His smile in that picture was pure joy. I whispered to it, "What happened to you, son?" Then I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The bank was cool and sterile when I arrived. The marble floors echoed under my shoes, and the scent of polished wood filled the air. I walked to the counter, where a young teller with kind eyes greeted me. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" For a moment, I wanted to collapse right there, to tell her everything, Instead, I leaned on the counter and said firmly, "I need to freeze an account." Her brows lifted slightly, but she nodded and led me to a private office. Inside, I explained what I wanted: a freeze on my $30 million. Every penny was locked tight, so not a dime could be touched without my signature. As I spoke, I noticed my voice. It was clear, steady, not the voice of a man begging. The banker asked me questions and double-checked the documents. Each time she passed a paper to me, my hand signed without hesitation. The pen moved with sharp strokes. No tremor at all. For the first time in months, I felt control flowing back into me like blood into a numb limb. When we were done, she looked at me with a softness in her eyes. "Are you all right, sir? This must be hard." That small concern from a stranger who didn't owe me a thing cut deep. My own son never asked if I was all right. Not once. Yet here was a young woman paid to move numbers on a screen, asking me if I was okay. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "I'll be fine, thank you." Next came my lawyer, John. Young, sharp, a mind like a blade. He looked surprised when I walked into his office without an appointment, but he welcomed me in. His shelves were lined with law books, but his desk was clean, with only a single folder waiting. I sat down and told him everything. My voice didn't break, my eyes didn't wander. I told him about the hidden box, the forged documents, the debts Melissa had racked up under my family's name. He listened carefully, taking notes, nodding. Then he pushed a folder across the desk. "I've been digging into Melissa's records," he said quietly. "There's more. She's got $750,000 in debt, flagged as high risk for fraud. She's leveraged your good name to get better rates." I sat back, the weight of it sinking in. "So they've been bleeding me dry behind my back." John nodded. "This is evidence, sir. This isn't just a betrayal of trust. It's criminal, and when the time comes, you can use this. Not just to protect your estate, but to expose them." Later that evening, the confrontation came to me. David and Melissa arrived uninvited, just as the sun was setting. They walked into my living room like they owned it, smiles painted on, their hands full of papers. "Dad, we need to talk," David began, his tone honeyed but tight at the edges. Melissa leaned in, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. "We've thought it through. If you give us $5 million, we can invest, pay down some loans, and secure the family's future." Her eyes glittered, not with care, but with hunger. I sat in my chair, hands folded, listening. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shout. I just watched. Their words spilled out faster, charts and promises, numbers that meant nothing to me, but meant everything to them. They thought they were convincing me, thought they were wearing me down, but all they were doing was showing me the depth of their greed. At one point, Melissa glanced at me with a smirk. "You wouldn't want to be the reason your grandkids suffer, would you?" The cruelty in her voice was sharp, meant to pierce me, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard a week ago when she'd sat in this very room with her friends, laughing about me. "That old man is stupid enough to hoard land like firewood," she'd sneered. "One day I'll spend every cent of his fortune, and no one will stop me." David had laughed along. I'd stood outside the door, invisible, humiliated. That memory burned in my chest as I looked at her now. I leaned forward, placed a hand on the spreadsheet, and pushed it back toward them. "I'll think about it," I said simply. My tone was flat, unreadable. Melissa's smile faltered for just a second. David's eyes narrowed. They weren't used to my silence. They weren't used to me holding my ground. And in that silence, I saw them, not as family, not as loved ones, but as predators caught in their own reflection. When they finally left, full of false cheer and fake hugs, I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection, at the tired eyes, staring back. Then I whispered, "They think I've lost, but the game has only just begun." That night, I opened the folder John had given me. Page after page of financial records, debts, signatures that weren't hers but mine, copied without permission. My hands traced the lines, each document a weapon. I groped for my phone and typed Melissa's name into a public record search. The results chilled me. She wasn't just in debt. She had a sealed case for fraud years back, one that had been quietly dismissed. A warning, buried deep, now unearthed. I knew then I had more than enough. The time for silence was over. The time for strategy had begun. I slid the folder back into its envelope, sealed it tight, and placed it on the table. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking each second like a drumbeat. The storm was coming, and I was ready. I want you, if you've ever known the sting of betrayal, to comment just one word: awake. Because that's what I feel now. Awake. The chapter closed with me standing in my living room, the envelope clutched in my hand, a small nod to myself. The board was set, the pieces were moving, and they didn't know that I already held the move that would end the game. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before sunrise and walked the halls of my own home as if I were walking a courthouse corridor. The oak floors held a faint shine from the polish I'd worked into them the night before. I straightened the framed photographs, ran my hand across the back of each dining chair, and felt the smooth wood under my palm. This house has stood since 1995. I set the first truss, I hung the last door. $600,000 on paper. Yes, but so much more in the marrow of my life. Today, it would witness what it was built to hold. Truth. I brewed coffee the way my wife liked it, strong and dark, and I set out a pitcher of water, glasses, and small plates. The table looked like a meeting room and a family dinner all at once. Tension and comfort, memory and judgment. I chose the head of the table and put the small wooden box within reach. Inside sat her letter, folded smooth, still smelling faintly of cedar. I placed the new will beneath it. Everything else, the bank records, the audio file on my phone, the sealed printout with the link to that champagne video, went into a clean manila folder. I put 2 chairs to my right for Frank and Carol. I put 2 chairs to my left for Edward and Helen. The seats across from me would belong to David and Melissa. No shadows, no corners. The doorbell rang at 9. My heart did not quicken. It settled. I opened the door and found them exactly as I had imagined. David with a jaw set too hard, like he'd practiced indignation in the mirror. Melissa with a smile that gleamed and did not reach her eyes. Edward was in a suit that fit him 20 years ago. Helen is in a pale cardigan, clutching her purse with both hands, the way a passenger clutches a life vest. I stepped back and said, "Come in." My voice came out even. It felt good to hear it be steady. Frank and Carol arrived behind them carrying a tin of cookies, as if this were a church social and not a storm. Frank nodded to me and slipped into his chair with the same calm I'd seen in him the day his own son lost their home to a bad loan. Carol put her hand over mine for a second and gave my fingers a light squeeze. "We're here," she said. 2 words. Enough. We took our seats. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked. A bird called from the maple outside and then, as if it also sensed the air, fell silent. I looked at each face and began. "Thank you for coming. We're here to clear up some confusion, to spare everyone the trouble of more rumors." I glanced at the camera on the sideboard, small, discreet, green light on. I didn't hide it. I wanted them to see it, to feel the straightness of the lines I had drawn. "Today we put everything in the open." David leaned back and crossed his arms. "We don't need a show, Dad," he said. "We just need to know you're thinking clearly." Melissa's hand floated to his forearm, gentle, practiced. "We're worried," she said. "You've been making rash decisions, freezing accounts, calling lawyers. That isn't like you." I let their words drop into the room and go still, like pennies into a well that had already been drained. "It is exactly like me," I said. "It is me you forgot, the me who kept records, the me who reads contracts, the me who knows where every dollar in a $30 million estate lives and breathes. That me has been awake for weeks." I watched Melissa's eyes flick to the folder in my hand. She wanted to see it, to gauge the thickness, to weigh the danger. I did not move it. I did not give her the comfort. I began with the smallest stones. "David," I said softly, "who paid your tuition?" He stared at the table, then at Melissa, then at me. "You did?" he mumbled. "All of it?" I asked. He nodded once. $120,000, I said. "Who bought your first car?" "You did," he said, quieter. $25,000, I said. "Who covered the reception when costs ran high? Band, catering, the extra tent when it rained?" His mouth flattened. "You did?" $15,000, I said, laying each number between us like a row of quarters. "These aren't accusations. These are facts. The little truths you keep calling ancient history. I want them on the table, because today we measure everything by truth." Melissa shifted forward, a smile still painted on. "No one is denying your generosity," she said. "We're grateful, but the situation now is different. The economy's tough. We've got opportunities. If we can just access $5 million from your portfolio, we can—" I lifted a hand, palm up, and her sentence stopped as if it had run into glass. "No," I said. Not loud. Final. The clock ticked. I opened the folder and slid a document to the center of the table. "This is different," I said. $750,000, a high-risk loan. The underwriting notes show a fraud risk flag. The attached signature is not mine. It is yours, Melissa. Edward blinked. Helen's hands tightened around her purse strap. Melissa let out a short, brittle laugh. "Anyone can forge," she said. "Anyone can make copies. This proves nothing." I pressed the button on my phone and set it next to the paper. Her voice filled the room, bright and hard, recorded as clean as sunlight on a blade. "Soon enough, the money will be ours," she said on the recording. "Every penny. He won't know what hit him. The silence afterward felt like the air before a summer storm, the kind that turns green and makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Helen made a sound that wasn't a sob and wasn't a word. Edward stared at his daughter as if seeing someone else wearing her face. Melissa swallowed and reached for David's sleeve, but he did not move. I let the silence spread to the edges of the room and then drew it back with one more clean cut. I set the tablet down, tapped the screen, and the champagne video played. Melissa, in a sleek dress, holding a glass high. The room around her filled with people I didn't know. "Soon," she laughed, "I'll be the lady of 30 million." The video ended. Helen said very quietly, "Melissa," just her name. It hurt worse than a shouted rebuke. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I looked to my right. "Frank?" He cleared his throat and sat straighter, the way a man sits when he intends to tell the truth all the way through. "I've worked beside Bob," he said, using the name my old friends use, "and I've watched him since his wife passed. He isn't confused. He isn't impulsive. He's careful. He's steady. He thinks before he moves, and when he moves, he knows why." Carol placed both hands on the table as if to brace the room. "He mows my lawn sometimes just to clear his head," she said with a small smile. "He fixed my porch light at 10 at night without being asked. He shows up. Don't you dare call him unwell, because he won't sign away his life." Their words were brief, plain and heavy. They anchored me. They pried the floorboards up from under the lie that I had lost my mind. I could feel Melissa's plan slipping, see her eyes dart as she searched for something to steady the pitch of her story. She chose offense. "You're humiliating us with old gossip and edited clips," she said, chin lifting. "This is beneath you." Her voice wavered on the last word. She heard it. We all did. I took a breath, opened the wooden box, and removed the letter. I have not unfolded it yet. I let my thumb rest on the crease as if I were holding down a charge that would blow if I took my hand away. "Before I read this," I said, "I want to remind you of something. I froze every account in my name in Chapter 3 of this life you're writing for me. $30 million, locked. I called my lawyer. I updated my will. None of this is sudden. This is the harvest from the seeds you planted and watered. Now we reap." I unfolded the letter. My wife's handwriting looked like music written by a careful hand. I read. She spoke to me from before pain took her strength. She wrote what she had seen in Melissa's paperwork. Dates changed, names squeezed into margins, a notary stamp that didn't match the register. She wrote about the hurried marriage license, the rush, the charm. She said she had asked questions and been handed answers wrapped in glitter and care. She said she held her tongue because she still hoped, because she didn't want to shatter me while she was alive. She asked me if I ever found the letter to remember that love is not blindness, that protection sometimes looks like steel instead of wool. She signed it with her full name and the little heart she used to draw when she left notes on the fridge. When I finished, the room was hushed in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with gravity. Helen cried quietly. Edward sat with his hands open on the table, palms up, as if expecting rain. David's head was down. Melissa was very still, like a deer that hasn't decided whether to bolt or bluff. She chose bluff. "She hated me," she whispered. "Your wife never wanted me in this family. She made things up to drive a wedge." I looked at the letter in my hand, then at Melissa. "She told the truth," I said. "You supplied the wedge." I set the letter aside and slid another sheet across the table. "Here's a printout from the bank," I said, voice calm, the way a judge speaks when he reads a sentence. "It shows that the account labeled Savings, House Repairs, $300,000 was accessed from your home network twice in the past month in attempts that failed after the freeze. It shows your name in the login trail." Melissa shook her head. "We were trying to make sure bills were paid," she said. "You already freeze everything. How are we supposed to protect your interests if you wall us out?" Frank gave a small disbelieving huff. Carol stared at Melissa with something between pity and disbelief. I didn't answer the rationalization. Lies don't starve when you feed them facts. They starve when you stop giving them your attention. Edward spoke for the first time, voice rough. "Melissa," he said, "is this true?" She snapped her eyes to him like he'd betrayed her by asking. "Dad, you know how money moves. Everyone does it. It's not a big deal." He lowered his gaze slowly, as if the strength to hold it up had left him for good. Helen took a breath that shook and then said, "I raised you to be kind. I thought I did." Melissa didn't look at her. I picked up the folder again. "I am not here to arrest anyone," I said. "I am here to end the story you wrote about who I am." I took out a single page and slid it to David. "Read the first line." He squinted, cleared his throat. "Last will," he said. His voice cracked on the word last. He kept reading, slower. "I, Robert Hayes, being of sound mind, do hereby distribute the whole of my estate, including but not limited to the family home at 104 Ridgeview, the Timberline Tract, the Blue Creek Holding, and all securities accounts totaling approximately $30 million, as follows." He stopped. He looked at me with eyes I recognized from the boy he used to be. the boy who had scraped his knee and asked if it would scar. "Dad," he said, and in that one syllable I heard his fear. "Don't." I took the page and read the part I wanted them to hear. Effective as of last week, after counsel and due diligence, the estate is placed into the Hayes Community Trust, a charitable vehicle to fund scholarships for trades, food security programs, and veterans' home repairs. A direct bequest of a significant portion will go to my granddaughter, Sarah Hayes, who has never asked and never taken. No distribution will be made to David Hayes or Melissa Hayes unless conditions of sobriety, restitution, and sustained employment are met for a period of 5 years, as attested by a third-party fiduciary. The remainder shall be administered by an independent trustee. I set the page down. The trust is funded, the accounts are moved, the house is protected, the land is deeded to the trust. You can't sell what you don't own. Melissa's chair scraped across the floor as she lurched to her feet. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is abuse. He's not well. He's being manipulated by strangers." She pointed at Frank and Carol as if two retired school teachers who bring cookies could sway the balance of a man's life. "We'll contest. We'll take you to court. We'll say you're incompetent." Her voice climbed and thinned. She was loud now, too loud, as if volume could shove truth back into a closet. I kept my seat. I kept my breath. I let her run until the energy spun out of her like a top slowing against the table. Then I said, mild as a man asking for the salt, "John." The hallway door opened, and my attorney stepped into view. He had been here for 20 minutes, sitting in the den with coffee and a legal pad, listening to everything with the door cracked just enough. Melissa's mouth opened and closed. David looked like a boy who had just realized his bluff had been called in front of his teacher. John nodded to the room, then set a binder on the table. "My name is John Morton," he said, easy, respectful. "I represent Mr. Hayes. I'm here as a courtesy to confirm what he's stated, and to answer any questions you have about the process, not persuasion. The will was executed with 2 witnesses and notarization. The trust is properly funded. The accounts are frozen under his authority. We have recorded deeds transferring the Timberline and Blue Creek parcels. We have a letter from his physician attesting to his capacity on the date of execution. If you choose to challenge, you're free to, but you will lose." Melissa sagged back into her chair as if something had cut the strings that held her upright. David rubbed both hands over his face and mumbled, "Oh, God." Edward stared at John, the way men look at the backs of ambulances driving away, knowing whatever was inside was gone beyond reach. Helen's tears slid quietly, steadily. Carol slid a tissue across the table to her, and Helen took it with a whisper of thanks. Still, I wasn't finished. The layers had to be peeled to the last. I touched the phone again, and another recording played, the one from that awful evening when I stood in the hallway and heard Melissa joke with her friends about the old man hoarding land like firewood. Her exact words, her laughter, David's chuckle in the background. The same room, the same walls. The sound landed like hail against the windows. Melissa stared at the phone as if it were a snake, and then came the crack inside their alliance, loud as a gunshot. David turned to her, eyes bright with wet fury. "You said it was under control," he hissed. "You said he'd sign. You said we'd have the house by summer." Melissa threw her hands up. "You promised me we wouldn't have to grovel. You said he was soft. You said he'd give in, like he always does. You're the reason we're standing here with nothing." Helen flinched at the word nothing. Edward shut his eyes, and his shoulders sank. I let them unravel. I let them expose what had driven them, not because I took pleasure in their shame, but because truth laid bare is the only solvent I know strong enough to strip greed down to raw bone. When the noise ebbed, I said softly, "I am not your enemy. I am your father, but I won't be your victim." I looked at David until he finally met my eyes. "I built you a life. You tried to take mine. There is a cost to that." I looked at Melissa, who had turned her face away like a child who doesn't want to be seen. "You thought kindness was weakness. You were wrong. Kindness is a choice. Today I choose justice." John opened his binder and read briefly into the camera. He stated the date. He stated the presence of witnesses. He stated the documents by name, the trust agreement, the updated will, the physician's capacity letter, the bank's freeze confirmation on the $300,000 savings account, and on the portfolio accounts that totaled $30 million, the recorded deeds for Timberline and Blue Creek. He spoke like a man reciting a recipe he had cooked 100 times. Simple, clear, finished. "You are, of course, welcome to counsel," he said to David and Melissa. "I will email you PDFs, but I would advise you to use today to think about what you want your lives to stand for in 5 years. The trust allows for redemption, but redemption requires work, not demands. It would have been enough. It should have been enough. But souls that won't surrender to evidence often need a final strike, the one truth no one can refit or file down." I closed the binder and put my hand on the wooden box again. I had read the letter aloud, yes, but there was one more page, a photocopy of a notarized complaint from years ago, buried in a county file. John had found it after I typed Melissa's name into a public record search and watched the screen spit out a sealed fraud case that never quite reached trial. He had pulled the thread I handed him. He had found the cloth. I set the copy on the table. "This is not to humiliate you," I said to Melissa. "This is to tell the full truth. You have done this before. Another family, another set of signatures, another pile of charm poured over a hole that could swallow them whole." She stared at the page as if letters were ants crawling. "It was dismissed," she whispered. "It never happened," John spoke gently. "It happened. The dismissal doesn't erase the facts, only the outcome. We're not here to punish you for your past. We're here to stop you from continuing it." Something in her face caved then, a corner of the mask buckling. She looked at David, searching for a handhold in a wall that had become glass. "You said we'd be okay," she said, and for the first time there was no sneer in it, only a smallness, a frightened girl looking for a door in a room without one. David hunched into himself. "You lied to me," he muttered. "You lied from the start." "You wanted to believe," she shot back. "You closed your eyes and reached for the wallet." They stared at each other over the wreckage they had built. Husband and wife, co-authors of a plan that had turned to ash in their mouths. I stood and the chair legs made a soft groan. The sound felt like the last page of a book turning. I placed both hands on the table and let the wood steady me. The room seemed a touch brighter, as if the house itself had exhaled. "I want you to hear this plainly," I said. "I forgive you. That doesn't mean I forget, and it doesn't mean you escape consequences. Forgiveness is for my peace, not your plan. I won't carry your anger any longer. I won't carry your debt. I won't carry your version of me." I turned to Edward and Helen. "I am sorry you had to hear your daughter like this. I am sorry the road led here under my roof. I promise you that trust will do good. It will carry my wife's heart farther than my hands could. If you ever want to see what it builds, I will show you." Helen nodded through tears. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracked and grateful. Edward's lips moved, but no sound came. He simply reached across the table and squeezed my forearm in an old man's grip that says more than talk. Frank and Carol both had their eyes wet. Frank cleared his throat and said, "You did right." Carol said, "She would be proud." I felt the words land and sink, not like stones, but like seeds. David stood then, wobbling a little as if seasick in port. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, not in anger, but in a kind of broken wonder. "Work," I said. "Make something with your hands. Pay back what you can. Show up when nobody's watching. I set conditions, not punishments. Live into them." He swallowed and nodded, just once, and in that nod I saw a small boy again who had fallen and was choosing to rise. Melissa stared at the letter and said nothing. John collected the documents and slipped them into his bag. He clicked off the camera and announced the time. "We're done here," he said gently. "Mr. Hayes, I'll be in touch this afternoon." He shook hands with Frank and Carol, nodded to Edward and Helen, and left the way he came, quiet as a hinge. We dispersed slowly, like folks leaving a graveside after the last shovel of dirt. There were no hugs. There were no goodbyes that sounded like promises. David and Melissa walked to the door without looking back. Edward and Helen paused on the threshold. Helen touched my cheek, a mother's blessing, and whispered, "May God keep you." I said, "And you." The door closed. The house held the echo and then absorbed it. I stood alone in the dining room and let my hand rest on the back of the chair where my wife used to sit. The cushion held the faintest indent, whether from memory or from the weight of a morning like this, I couldn't say. The light through the window shifted, laying a warm rectangle across the hardwood. The clock ticked, not ominous now, simply present. I breathed. The new will lay in a neat stack. The letter returned to its box. The trust papers sat where they belonged, signed, witnessed, finished. I felt something I had not felt in months, relief, not the giddy kind, the deep kind that settles in your bones and tells your body it may finally sleep. Later, I made myself a sandwich and ate it at the counter like a man who had just come in from the field. I washed the plate and set it to dry. I walked the perimeter of the house, checked the locks, checked the windows, not because I feared a break-in, but because ritual steadies a heart. On the porch, the air smelled like cut grass and summer dust. I sat in the rocker and let it creak. A boy on a bike rode past and waved. I waved back. He didn't know he had just saluted a man who had pulled a family back from the edge of a cliff. Inside, the phone vibrated. A message from John. PDF sent, recording saved, filings noted. Another message from the bank. Freeze confirmed, $300,000 in savings secure, portfolio accounts under trustee oversight, house title recorded into trust. Each chime felt like a nail set true. The structure stood. I turned the phone to camera mode and recorded a short message for the people who would one day hear this story in full. My voice was calm. It belonged to me again. The worst pain in my life was not being poor, I said. It was being dismissed by my own blood. I was being told I was old, confused, and easy to push aside. That pain is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves respect, please comment one word. Respect. Now let's see what they will do to change that. I set the phone down and looked around my home. Not a vault anymore, not a target, but a place. The maple leaves shivered with a breeze. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon oil. My wife's letter rested where it had, waiting for no one, promising nothing except the fierce gift of what is real. Justice had not roared. It had walked in on steady feet and taken its chair at the table. I could hear it breathing. I could feel it settle. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and the slow work of repair. Tomorrow would bring people with opinions. Tomorrow would bring quiet moments when I missed what used to be and questioned what comes next. But tonight, this house would sleep. And so would I. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The papers were signed, the trust was funded, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat. The battle that had filled my days with tension and suspicion was over. Melissa stormed out of my house that morning with eyes like fire. David collapsed into himself and buried his head in his hands. And I sat at my kitchen table with a pen that felt heavier than any hammer I had ever swung. That pen marked the end of their plan and the beginning of my peace. The lawyer shook my hand and left me with copies, and I sat there in silence, feeling the weight slide off my shoulders. $10 million was transferred to a community trust, every form filed, every account sealed. The rest I secured for my old age and for the one person in this family who never tried to take, my granddaughter. It was finished. The news spread quickly, the way such things always do in small towns. People looked at me differently, not with pity anymore, but with respect. Some came up to me at the grocery store and patted my shoulder, saying, "You did right, Bob?" Others just nodded as if they had known all along, but didn't dare say it. Melissa and David, on the other hand, could not walk into a diner without whispers following them. Word of their scheme, of the recordings and the letter, traveled faster than the wind. Soon they were renting a small apartment above a laundromat on the edge of town. The house they thought would be theirs, the $30 million they thought they'd control. All of it was gone. I did not rejoice in their fall, but I could not save them from it either. Choices carved their own roads. Melissa tried to send me a message a week later, an email full of lines about being sorry, about wanting to start fresh. I read it once, then deleted it. Forgiveness is not the same as reunion. My peace came from letting go of their grip on me, not from hearing their words. I whispered to myself, I don't need their apology. I have my life. And I meant it. My mornings became simple again. I planted tomatoes and beans in the backyard. I dug my hands into the soil and felt steady in a way I hadn't since my wife was alive. At sunrise, I brewed strong coffee, sat with Frank and Carol on the porch, and listened to the birds. Sometimes we laughed about nothing at all. Sometimes we sat in silence. And it was enough. On Sundays, I joined the service at the small white church with the tall steeple. The hymns rose, and I found myself singing again, my voice shaky but free. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I decided to use part of what I had left to do something my wife would have loved. I set up a scholarship in her name for students in construction and engineering. The first letter of thanks arrived from a young man at the local college, telling me how he would use the money to buy his first set of tools. I held that letter like gold. That, I thought, is the legacy worth leaving. Not money hoarded in secret, not land argued over at the dinner table, but hands building something honest. From time to time, people asked me if I regretted cutting Melissa and David out. My answer was always the same. Love without respect is just chains, I said, and I broke mine. Parents must set boundaries. Love doesn't mean being blind, and sacrifice doesn't mean surrender. Children who let greed rule their hearts will pay the price sooner or later. And in the end, the truth is always heavier than lies. No amount of scheming could change the handwriting of my wife's letter, the sound of Melissa's own voice on that recording, or the empty look in David's eyes when he realized he had lost. One evening I sat on my porch, the sun setting over the maples. A little girl from down the street, no older than 7, skipped by with a wildflower in her hand. She stopped, smiled at me, and said, "This is for you, Mr. Hayes." She placed it in my palm and ran off. I stared at the tiny yellow petals trembling in the breeze, and I felt my chest swell with something pure. The world still held kindness. The world still had hope. And I had stepped out of the shadows in time to see it. As for Melissa and David, the last I heard, they were scraping by. Melissa lost her job after the fraud whispers caught up with her. David works part-time, no longer boasting about deals or inheritances, just keeping his head down. They tried to call me once, but I let the phone ring. Some doors must stay closed. My respect for myself was the lock, and I had no interest in giving them the key. Now every day feels like proof that I chose right. I eat dinner with neighbors. I play cards at the community hall, and I tend my garden. I'm not rich in the way they wanted me to be. I'm rich in something else: freedom. I look around at my little world and say, I finally found where I belong. And when I think of my wife, I smile instead of crying. She left me a letter that saved me. I answered it with a life that honors her. The lessons are carved deep now. For parents, the lesson is to hold your ground. Don't let love blind you into slavery. For children, the lesson is simple. Greed rots the heart, and no amount of money will save you from yourself. And for the rest of us in this wide modern world, the lesson is that character is the only wealth that never runs dry. Homes collapse, accounts vanish, but honesty and respect stay. I whisper to myself sometimes when the night is quiet, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. The words no longer taste bitter. They taste like freedom. And so I'll leave you with this. Life will test you. Sometimes those tests come from strangers, sometimes from your own blood. But your worth is not in what others demand of you. It's in the boundaries you protect, the truth you hold, and the peace you claim. If you felt the weight of my story, if you've known the sting of betrayal or the freedom of choosing respect, I want to hear from you. Comment on the lesson you found most meaningful, the one you'll carry into your own life. Because our stories may differ, but the truth we share can build something stronger than any inheritance. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.